Yeah, all set.
Okay. Well, Matt, again, thank you for being here with us and with me. And for everyone out there, Beth Kaminkow, I'm the Global CEO of VMLY&R Commerce, and I'm thrilled to be speaking, as we've heard, to Matt Torello, Global Vice President of Amazon for the Coca-Cola Company. And Matt, you've been in this role for 2.5 years, and before that, a few more years. So I think about four, a little bit more than four in total at Coca-Cola. Starting as the Senior Manager of Channel Planning and Development, as well as Director of E-commerce of Revenue Growth Management and Planning. And then even before that, you were at Rubbermaid and Georgia Pacific and other companies, all within the kind of e-commerce space. So I would say a true e-commerce native. Not many of those in the industry.
Yeah, yeah. And I was to say, at one point I had really good hair, and maybe that's the pro or con of it at this point as well. So
Not exactly the way to promote the industry, although you're looking great.
yeah,
Okay,
thank
so
you.
let's get right into it. I think, as we get into, the strategies that you're employing and the company has been thinking about, and I'm sure shaping and shifting based on the last several months of consumer behavior change in the commerce space. Uh, so even prior to your plans, focus on Amazon as a priority, now even more emphasis on how do you optimize and make the most of the Amazon and other commerce channels.
Yeah,
We would love to hear from you and to talk a little bit about, as the world's largest non-alcoholic beverage company, over 200 brands across several categories. What are some of the changes that are taking place? And how are you selling differently or thinking differently about your strategies to address the consumer needs today?
yeah, it's a great question. I think it always goes back to what's the role of the brand, and what's the role of the consumer, and how do you want to play into that? And when we look at e-commerce, and I've been fortunate enough to have e-commerce for pretty much almost my whole career, it's changed drastically. If you look at Amazon over the past few years, I mean, you start from marketplace to core to fresh to retail. I mean, it's an ever evolving piece of it. And you can get really caught up in how does this platform perform? What's the objectives? What's the KPI? Where are the operational components of it? But if you really take a step back and say, what's the role of the brand and what's the role of the customer? It allows you to be really true to the strategy and help deliver against it. And as I look at it kind of from an industry side and also from our piece, it's really being hyper focused on that consumer experience. The beauty about Amazon is, everybody says it's an ecosystem. It's a great buzzword. I would say it's really true as well, right? It's really an ecosystem. So how do you leverage that ecosystem to deliver brand love and engagement to your consumers in a very natural and unimpeding way, to drive awareness, to drive impressions, or also drive transactions? So I would say the way that we look at it and the way I see it from an industry side is those who are doing it successful are always going back to the role of the customer, and the role of the consumer, and how do you leverage this ecosystem, if you will, to go deliver against that. And I think what we've seen with COVID is really an acceleration. Got a lot of new people getting into the market for the first time. You can argue there's anywhere from a few to for multiple years of increase of demand. The question always becomes, there's going to be stickiness, but it forces you to make sure that you have the right strategy, the right focus, and going back to your guiding principles from a beginning perspective.
It's smart, and it seems like that will kind of stand the test of time in a way, or anything that kind of comes our way in terms of new forces and pressures, something
Yeah.
that can be a tried and true strategy. So when you think about this, moment in time though, and the emphasis on contactless,
Yep.
touchless, new concerns about hygiene, and I'm sure obviously that was a massive driver of this deeper consumer penetration and conversion into the e-commerce channels. Are you thinking innovatively and differently, because you service the consumer in so many different ways
Yep.
through the whole consumer journey and all the places that they may like physically and literally touch your product
Yep.
and brands?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's a great question. And I think it also goes, like, we're doing things. I mean, we sell products online, right? And Amazon's a digital channel. So there's ultimately that not physical touch, if you will, walk into a grocery store. But one of the things that we've done is, as we look at Amazon, and I would say those who are winning are looking at Amazon broader across all components, retail, media, and web services. And we had a great article that came out recently between our Freestyle team and Amazon Web Services, where we actually created a touchless app for our Freestyle machines. So now across the Freestyle network, you can go in and order your beverage, get ready on your app, and it's an app that you scan that automatically pours your beverage. So you don't have to focus on worrying about touching the screen. It's one step closer, but it's also a natural occasion that says, like, yeah, this makes sense, right? You're leveraging the system, you're leveraging the engagement. And it also shows the power between both, customer and client, or customer or partner, depending which way you look at it, to find a joint solution in there, to provide a service back to the consumers in this world of what we're seeing change. And I think that's probably one of the best examples that shows that dual collaboration, but also very real output, that now consumers who are going in there have a touchless option to go select their wonderful beverages of Freestyle in a touchless manner.
Yeah, well, we do a lot of work with Amazon too. And I know we were talking about how they're really thinking about their ecosystem and marketplace,
Right.
this full funnel marketing space.
Yeah.
And so whether your products are even selling through Amazon, your consumers are there.
That's right.
Engaging with other products. So how do you think about their applications and their services in a much more expanded way? So I think that's an incredible use case. And just so I want to make sure everyone, I love Freestyle.
Yeah.
I was so excited when they brought it to the American Airlines terminal. So I would love for you just to make sure that you tell everybody, because some people may not know what that language is and what you're referencing.
Fair. Think of it as a on-demand bottler. So you have a Freestyle dispense unit that you can make your own combinations of flavors and pour. So you can do great flavors in there, such as Coke with strawberry. So there's different flavor combinations in there, and you have the customization, if you will, of your full pour. I would say, to build off of kind of your tee up into this, I would say those who are winning from an industry side and taking a step back and looking at it from a broad perspective, there's always two ways to engage. Do you drive this platform for experiences and or transactions? And they're not necessarily mutually exclusive, but you go into that full funnel approach that says, okay, I'm here from an experience. I want to make sure that the brand is resonating with the consumer, driving an experience, driving an impression, driving loyalty and love. Oh, and by the way, you can also drive transactions, and again, it's not either or, and sometimes it's both, but it gives you that flexibility and that freedom to really operate from a true ecosystem of all touch, versus simply saying, here's a VPC, here's an ad, and here's a sponsor brand, please buy me, right? It's beyond that, and neither one are right or wrong, but it gives you those opportunities and those options to look at more from a broad perspective.
So talk to us a little bit about organizationally how that happens. Like, take us behind the scenes and let's talk about, like, what are the changes that you all are making, whether it's structurally with alignments, what happens at a global level in terms of what strategies are set, and then what is much more of a kind of a ground up local way of thinking about the activation.
Yeah, it's interesting because there's so many different paths, and I can say, so I've had Amazon in 3 different companies in my career, and I would say each is a little bit different on how it's structured, and it's also a testament of where's the journey of the organization in there. So there's no right or wrong answer. I would say on one part you can say, hey, look, e-commerce is fully split out versus fully, the second part being fully embed. I would say it goes back to the company's mission, and is it a separate channel? And the whole debate is it a sales channel? Is it a marketing channel? Separate, internal, non-external? So I think it goes back to, Coke's done a great job developing kind of the future status in terms of how we operate from an organization. And from our emerging stronger, we look at it and making sure that it's embedded. And while we have a dedicated, O to O team, it's part of the everyday role. So the days of, I have retail, and I don't think there's any retailer out there today, brick and mortar, that is not interested or focused on click and collect or digital or having their own new media organization built into it. I don't think there's any retailer out there not doing that to size at this point. So it has to be part of the embedment of the role, right? You have to look at it as a holistic approach where it's now a different lever to pull for the customer, and it has to be embedded. There's always going to be COE components in terms of global scale, global reach, best practices, frameworks, if you will, but it really has to be embedded within your organization because everybody's going to be making a call. The way we look at it is, like I said, we have an O2O organization, but we really want to also instill those practices that transcend kind of functional groups and it's part of an everyday kind of occurrence and an everyday mission for the associates. Because I would say 5 years ago, maybe a different tone, maybe a different approach. Today, it's much different, even prior to COVID. And I think COVID has really accelerated that embedment. But it's got to be part of the core competencies, because again, anybody who has a customer, it's all part of their plan right now, right? The goal is not to get backwards on it, but you want to be able to accelerate it and complement it as best as you can as well.
Interesting. So like as an e-commerce native, as I've joked about earlier,
Yeah.
you know, I'm one of the things I've admired about what you've done in your roles is rethink the ways of measuring your success and or like the leading indicators, you know, slash tied to the KPIs.
Yep.
Can you talk a little bit about like what have you learned? How have you learned it? And
Yeah.
how are you applying that thinking now to the, you know, the tangible ways that you can tell that you're on the right track to success in your space?
Yeah, I think the first one is, and I would say I've had 3 examples and they've all been a little bit different, hence the lack of hair at my head at this point. But I would say what you don't want to do is be forced to make subpar decisions based upon an internal structure or an internal P&L, right? You want to look at it and go back to the role of the brand and the role of the customer. You should be able to take your brand and really push it across the customer and ecosystem and their capability, agnostic of saying, I need to sell this. So if I go back to, you know, the role of experiences versus transactions, depending on who's making that call, you might not be getting the direct sale from a P&L perspective, but it might be the right path for the brand in terms of the journey. So really opening up where you're not only focused on singular KPIs, as in, here's my ROAS, or here's my sales, or I sold X amount of units compared to a VPC or a sponsored search. Like you're looking at the full funnel approach in terms of what's the role of that brand. Are you looking for experiences? Are you looking for transactions? I drove X amount of impulse or X amount of impressions, X amount of new to brand with repeat. Those are great metrics, but it goes back to the right organic approach from the brand perspective. So you're simply not just running out there. And I think anybody who's been on Amazon as a brand owner, especially from the media side, in the past 6 months, you've probably seen a few things. One, click-through rates are super high, and there's a lot of clutter in there, so everybody's doing search, and that's great. There's a lot of brands that has the role for it, and that's make or break. But you want to look at it broader, that says what's the role of it. But more importantly, you never want to be in a position where you're forced to make it just because of how the P&L shakes out. And going back to those guiding principles of what's the role of the brand, what's the role of the channel, and the customer allows you to kind of walk both of those lines and kind of pick and choose what the right approach is, where you're not just dumping a bunch of search in the channel, and you're really driving the experiences led to that brand. And as you look from our portfolio, I mean, we have a large portfolio, and there's different journeys of each brand across that. So what might work from a Coke is a little bit different than Smart Water, but it goes back to those core principles and those core competencies on what's the role of the customer, what's the role of the brand. Is it solely experiences, solely transactions? And you play it out that way. But I would say the biggest watch out is avoiding, I'm making this decision because it affects my singular P&L, and that's a very narrow approach. And what we're seeing is it's becoming much broader at that perspective.
So it's a true organizational view.
That's right.
Yeah.
And I'd be interesting, I don't know if I'm allowed to do this. Can I flip the question? Because, you know, I'm looking at it through 3 industries from my side, but like, I mean, I would imagine kind of in your role in your company, you're probably seeing a great spread of it. And I would say from my industry, it's a little bit different because there's a few digitally native brands, but there's not a ton just yet at scale or at size. But I'd imagine, is it fair to say you're kind of seeing a similar spread between the two, where there's no right or wrong answer, I think is the key here. But it's a response and a change that you're seeing across the industry. Is that fair to say, kind of from your lens?
Absolutely. And I think that the more that we are able to identify what, you know, seem like selling transactional channels for the value that they're driving for, you know, building brand awareness, brand discovery, brand trials, you know, all of these other metrics, not vanity, that may seem like vanity metrics, but it's, you know, incredible when you see in a commerce channel, the, you know, ability to engage a consumer more deeply. And it's the, you know, consumers, I always say this to our clients and to our employees, you know, like consumers aren't thinking in terms of channels. They're not thinking, okay, now going to Amazon because I'm in the Amazon channel.
That's right.
You know, they're thinking in terms of their needs and their wants
That's
and their
right.
discoveries, and so we just really need to meet consumers where they are. And the beauty of it is we have now the data and the understanding to better do that.
Yeah. No, that's fair. And it's interesting. I mean, that whole channel approach is key. Like there is no Amazon channel. It's I'm buying something or I'm experiencing something channel, right? Agnostic of everything. And those who are looking at that way, I think are destined for success, like looking at it broader versus nope, this is my map price and I'm in this channel only. And it's you know, and especially now, I mean, if you look at the surge of other e-com customers, and while my lens is Amazon in this role, I mean, you look at the work GoPuff is doing and Walmart delivery pickup are doing. I mean, it's really accelerating a lot, and it's providing a great layer of competition, but also availability from a consumer. So it's a great time to be a consumer today. And it's an even better time to make sure you have the right strategy on engagement for that. So you can really drive and leverage the brand.
So you talked about digitally native brands, and I'm curious, you know, you take the Coca-Cola company,
Yep.
500 brands, I think it's 5 categories, that kind of, you know, really strong brand awareness, brand love,
Yep.
and ability to serve a whole bunch of different consumer needs. But then through the e-com channels and direct to consumer, whatever that might be, you know, you've got a huge amount of beverage brands cropping up. I mean,
Yep.
I think even physically, there's the New York City store around the corner from me, and there's like an entire aisle, and I don't
Yep.
recognize a single brand on that aisle, but yet they've been able to get that physical space. So I'm curious how that's changing the game. Are you feeling that kind of pressure at your company right now, and how are you leveraging, you know, your relationship with an Amazon to guard against some of that, or to make yourself as competitive as you need to be for the future?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. So a little bit of an oxymoron. So Whole Foods also, I lead our Whole Foods business as well.
Yes,
So, you know, as you think about innovation and new innovative brands, what's great about, if I'll take Amazon or digital as a whole, the barrier to entry is pretty low. I mean, in the past, you typically need a pretty big route to market distribution network as a channel perspective. You need deliveries, you need store slotting, merchandisers. It's a pretty big, hefty haul to launch brands in a successful manner beyond a very localized center. With digital, and especially in an ambient case, I mean, you can launch a brand out of your garage today, and you can hit every household in Amazon's radius of the U.S. So the barrier to entry is really low, and we're seeing, you know, a huge significant trend in better for you functional beverages. And what I've seen as a whole, and this is kind of across all categories, there's always a shiny toy everybody latches onto pretty quickly, right? So this is a component that I look at it and say, what's really driving from a site perspective? What's trending? What's coming in new? Are people really interested into adaptogen, for example, right? And if the answer might be yes, because I might like it, but what are the sales? So it allows you to get real live kind of measurement, not just from a scan share perspective, but also from an engagement side. So I think from a lens perspective, it gives you extremely rich, detailed information around what's new, what's coming, what's trending, in a way that we've not really seen in the past. And selfishly, for me, it's great because I could look at it from both customers on that I represent, but also from a trend perspective. I mean, there's a ton of functional beverages out there, and the wave of new lines and new brands, it's incredible. So I'll go back to saying it's a great time to be a consumer in this state. But the barrier to entry is so low, especially if you use marketplace or D2C, where you're getting an exposure to so many different brands, categories, trends. It's maybe going to give you something to think about and be really insightful for, saying, oh, maybe we should think about that category. Or, hey, everybody's super hot on this, but guess what? It sold very little in the past, 12 rolling months. So it gives you that layer of balance. But without a doubt, you're seeing a huge surge, and I think that's a great thing. And leveraging the data, especially if you get down to zip or FC location, gets super rich in terms of those insights, of those valuations.
Interesting. So on that point, talk to me a little bit about, like, how do you balance your priorities from short-term management, really almost in real time? Like, are you getting your hands on data and reacting and managing across the platforms of Whole Foods and Amazon and others just literally in real time? Or are you, and how much are you also still matching that with that need to have longer term strategic planning?
It's a tough one. I would say depends on the day, to be candid. I would say the pro is having the right strategy up front allows you to be really focused on the end goal. And I'll take, last year as a great example. Our strategy you can have in January 1 probably changed fairly rapidly come, May 1. And that's either a good or bad thing. You're either rushing into a channel either as an opportunistic way or a very defense way. That either could be good or bad, or it might have a different result. I think my approach is having the right strategy on what we want to go do. Like, what's the objective? What's the focus of outlines that you want to hit, both short term or near term, or short term and long term, and go execute against that. The downside with digital is that there's a ton of data, and you can get super lost into it or super wound up saying, okay, we're chasing anything and everything under the sun. And my background, being in e-commerce, is kind of more in the analytical side. So for me, it's interesting, but it's hard to come up for air and say, okay, we got all these crazy ideas of all this like data overload. What are you going to do with it, right? So it's having that right balance. But I'm a big believer, and I think we've seen it kind of, if I still reference last year as a great example, without having the right strategy on the role of the brand, role of the customer, role of the channel, you're going to start being reactive either in the good way or the negative way, and you're not going to come up and realize that till after the fact. So the focus would be, how do you have the right strategy? And the data gives you real live insights. Is it going to tell you enough that says, hey, maybe we turn on a new functional brand or a line or adjust our search? Well, yes and no, but it gives you that kind of short-term objective that says, is this going to help complement and achieve our objectives? Is this off to the side? And then how do you straddle that? I would say the risk that I've seen, again, looking at my career and my history, it's easy to get distracted. And I'll go back to the shiny toy analogy. It's easy to focus on a shiny toy and go chase it. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And I think the downside with digital is you get live data pretty quickly. And while data is overall sometimes challenging, you still get it. You want to be focused and make sure it's a complement to your strategy, back to your brand, back to your mission, and back to the role.
This is just going to be a little promotion question for you, since we have an audience here, and
Sure.
It's always great to get your products out in front of them. Are there any products selling through Whole Foods or Amazon that we may not be aware of that you would recommend we search on our Amazon right now and put in our baskets?
I'll tell you what, I'm a big fan of our Coke with Energy. I mean, we had a great partnership last year at CES with Alexa. So, I think it's a great brand. We got a lot of new innovation with smart water coming out in terms of functional. So, I mean, it's a great time, and we're seeing a lot of that innovation coming out around that in terms of what we have. But, I'm a Coke Classic guy, but I'm really, really enjoying the Coke Energy. And I'm really bullish on the new smart water brands, and the smart water obviously is going to be in Whole Foods. So excited for that. But it goes back to the value that, turning on a brand fairly quickly, assuming you have the right network, the right route to market set up. And it gives you so much more speed than what you've had in the past.
I do love this direction that the beverages are going in terms of functional.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's incredible to have, be able to create ingredients now in combinations that really are designed for a specific, way that you want to feel, and if you want to be energized or relaxed or calmed, or it's incredible.
Well, it's great because, I mean, anybody who can think of analogies, and I get super hooked on it in terms of all the different functional ingredients and stuff. And in the past, I mean, you're kind of hunting for them in random stores and, places that you probably never been to. Now it's kind of all in the open. So you got that level of trial, which it's easy. Like, it's also safe. Like, I can order it and get it to my house pretty quickly.
Yeah.
I don't have to get in my car. Maybe that's a lazy aspect of me as well. But it gives you so much more demand and availability out there that you've never had in the past. And also on the flip side, there's also a measurement on there. So you can say, again, is this really meaningful? Are people really hooked on it? Is there repeat? It kind of validates it for you. But again, I think as a consumer in this space, it's probably one of the best times we've seen, because there's so much innovation and there's so much expansion and availability more than we've seen in the past.
I completely agree. So before we go to questions, and I see that there are a few, so anybody else that might have a question out there, feel free to put it into the Q&A. But I'd like to talk a little bit about, get some personal insights. So
Sure.
I imagine that you are a consumer and a shopper yourself. So tell me a little bit about, your Amazon shopping habits.
Yeah. I would say it's good and bad. It's enabled me to be a lot more lazier in some of my gift purchases. I don't know if that's a category or not to pick from, but it's easy to shop. And for me, I'm kind of the more of the frantic shopper. I like to try new products. So for me, it's easy to try that. I'm sure my wife is not the happiest with all the packages that come up to the house occasionally. But for me, I use it as an add-on that we can go in and we can go, leverage it. So Core, very easy for us to order from Core. Fresh, I mean, we have a facility in a Whole Foods right next to our house. So for me, it's part of that occasion. And it's a routine as well. With one kid and one on the way, it's a very life-saving, marriage-saving routine. So it allows us to be flexible, but also leveraging the quality that's out there. So, part of the groceries are part of our basket. And then, the lazy part about it is, as I look at Mother's Day this Sunday, probably haven't been the best in thought ideas, but it's so much easier to just purchase stuff online for me. So frantic, but a little bit dependent on it as well.
Well, when we were chatting before, you made an interesting point when I was talking about a time when we could, I remember in the industry, everybody from consumers all the way through to the business side and client side were saying, I can't see buying, massive beverage,
Yep.
through digital. It just isn't going to happen, given the pack sizes and the format. And you made a good point, which is they might be, big and bulky, but they're not, bruising bananas.
That's right. That's right. And I look at it in two ways. I mean, I always say this, regardless what category you shop, what industry you shop, or what company you're for, I look at it this, it's always very emotional. You might not be the shopper, but there are shoppers out there. And I think that's the right data validation. Am I going to buy, certain items online? Probably not, but people do, right? All day long. So I might not be that shopper, but the shopper's out there. So that's one, is kind of delineating that component, but also, there's certain categories that are safer. I mean, I think what we've seen with COVID is a mass increase in the channel, many for the first time ever. A lot of stickiness, a ton of stickiness we would expect coming from there. There are certain products that are more, safer for a repeat, as you would think. I mean, I don't have to check the rightness of certain packages, and if they're dented, maybe you squeeze it and they undent themselves. So there's different categories and brands and segments that lean in as a pro, and it's a very safe, experience where it's just an added piece that you don't have to worry about. So, but I always go back to saying, you might not be the shopper, doesn't mean that there are no shoppers out there. So it's a good piece of just validation, and also just a little bit of correctiveness in terms of defining what the true occasion is.
Yeah. Well, you've got a couple media questions here. The
Sure.
first is, how do you approach emerging media channels, and how do you factor in your overall strategy? And I'll hook that to the next one, which is, how do you see media partnerships, especially in TV, evolving in 2021 and 22?
I think the thing with media is you want to make sure you understand the role of it. And I'll go back and I'll include this as media, even though I'll probably get told it's not. Like, if you look at search, right? I mean, everybody jumped into search pretty aggressively throughout the summer and a little bit now, and that has great return, but it goes back to what the brand is. I mean, you're obviously seeing a lot of OTT TV really bubbling up across every industry. It's great if you have the right strategy for the brand activation. I'd always be hesitant just jumping in because either you have a really good sales deck, or it's something that's out there that everybody can see. It's what's the true drivers of that. How do you measure the performance? How do you measure the objective with it? You can say Twitch is on that, OTT is on that, music is on that. All look great. They look great, but is it driving the value of your measurement program and is it driving the right return? And maybe you don't know, but I would look at it from that lens versus simply saying, hey, I got an OTT deck, let's go in, right? And I will go back to the role of the brand and the role of the channel and what's your objectives, right? And use that as a complement. So I always look at it through that side, and I would say that's pretty consistent with at least my roles prior to this. Is what's the role? You're seeing a lot more kind of entry into buff funnel, if you will, like again OTT, video, music, and I think there's all great roles with it and the right brands with the right executions of it. What won't be success is jumping in just because you want to, and maybe doing the bare minimum or not doing enough, and it crapping out, and everybody's has that really bad taste in their mouth, and then it loses it. And I think the way I would approach it is, what's the right objective, and is it the right investment, right? Maybe it's too little or too much. Like, how do you get it the fair shake and have the right measurements around there, and be open to what those KPIs look like as influence versus coming in saying, I've never done this and I want to do it and I need to hit this KPI, but please make that work. Like, that's not the role of it just yet. But I would say being open, going back to what your strategies are and what the role of the brand is. You're seeing a lot of engagement, again, back to OTT, video, Fire TV, music. Get Fit Live is a great example. All very different occasions, very different objectives. They're either on strategy or not. They're either going to drive a ton of transactions or very little. So really having that right definition on there and making sure that you're leveraging it. You're not being forced into a decision that you don't want to be, but you're leveraging it as a true learning perspective.
Interesting. Do you feel like that's a lot different over the last year versus, would you have given a different answer, do you think, a year and a half ago?
I would say if I would give a different answer a couple of years ago, just based on the journey of the brand, right? I kind of talk on both sides, experiences versus transactions. At some point, you need to sell something, right? So like, it's a good blend. If you're 100% on one side versus the other, I mean, that's where it becomes a little bit challenging. Without a listing, there's no experiences, right? So there's that, that constant tension. And I would say, depending on the role of the brand, kind of fits into that. And if you look across the journey, you probably start with transactions up front just to build the base, build the viewership, build the subscriptions, create the foundation that there's repeatable purchase, and then layering on from the transaction side. So if you were to ask me that 2 years ago, I'd probably have a little bit of a different perspective. I could tell you very different perspectives in the two companies that came from before. But now you're kind of molding it out there. And to be fair, we have a huge portfolio of brands. It's different for each one. And even across other near category competitors and other companies out there, it's not a one size fits all. But you go back to where's the journey of the brand today? But without a doubt, I mean, we're seeing way more, OTT video above funnel activations that we've seen in the past. I would expect more to come. And it's just validation of it. Is it the right approach? Is it not? Get Fit Live is a big activation that's been really circling the decks out there recently. So I would imagine, if I take Amazon as an example, continue evolution, continue advancements of their offerings, and you want to move with it, but it's obviously a little bit different than where we were a couple of years ago.
I think we have time for at least one more. And
Sure.
This interesting one was when we were kind of talking a bit about direct to consumer and addressing the opportunity that is e-commerce a little bit differently. Are you trialing products that might just go straight to e-com and never make its way into a physical retail store for a different distribution channel play, and or just another kind of direct to consumer channel approach?
Yeah, I think direct to consumer is really fascinating because we sometimes look at it, very at times, and I would say this more of a macro side, very singular, right? I think that seeing that the fact that you can get into new brands pretty quickly is super rich. It's also very costly as well. So there's a dual approach to that. I think what we've done, if you look at our any industry or any report that we had, is like the Coke Insiders Club was fantastic. It's a way that we actually trialed new products directly to consumers as an intro. And I think that's a great role that it can play. It is a very big complement for the subscribers and for the users. So I think if I look at it from a future side, D2C can play a very rich role, both in terms of providing a unique experience for existing brands, and this would be across all categories and industries, but also enhancing that experience with new innovation, right? The beauty about even, and here's where it gets a little bit, controversial. You say direct to consumer. I would also include maybe marketplace as part of that as well. If you're on marketplace or FBA, getting a product directly to an end user direct, how you get there is a little bit different, but being able to kind of control, if you will, that message and have a curation of it is where the value is. And whether that's new products or new experiences, such as a custom product or a new guide, or go one click further saying, okay, you buy this, you now get a virtual showing of a concert or something, right? Very exploratory. Like that's, I think, super rich and super fascinating. It's a little bit beyond saying we're only going to create innovation only on e-com, but it's more around how do you create that right experience, leveraging that channel or that lever as it. And that's where I think D2C is much broader, in my opinion, than just I'm going to sell a product and you get it in a fancy box with a higher price point, to, you know, what's the right occasion and what's the right goal around that. But if you look at the Coke Insiders that we have, I think is the most clear example. And it goes back to, you know, what's the role of it and how do you want to leverage that from an engagement perspective?
It's a wonderful strategic conversation, and I'm sure a lot of people are taking notes as you speak. Okay, well, we'll bring this home with one more personal question, kind of fire around. Work from home or go back into the, you know, office, the work environment, and back to the airports?
Yeah, it's tough. I would say for me personally, I mean, I've traveled a lot in my career, and I've always had kind of a dual work from home and office approach, right? And for anybody who's traveling, I live in Atlanta and I got a customer in the West Coast, so travel in that scenario. It's interesting. There's so much richness in meeting people live. I mean, it's hard to replicate that. On the selfish side, it's also nice not having to pack a suitcase every other week. So it's that kind of approach. I would say, you know, what we've seen here is a trend that I think is going to stay. I mean, you know, great. The Earth still moved after 16 months, and it didn't stop because people work from home. Each company, each role is in a such different place of that. There's a lot of richness in meeting face to face with collaboration, even with new teams and customers. How do you replicate that online? I think is a tough piece, but you know, going back to 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, I've been fortunate enough to not be in that, so I can't speak broadly, but I think, you know, for me, that'd be a tough one. You know, but I think this allows you to say, look, we did it. The Earth is still spinning. You know, there's still that type of connection. I miss traveling, but I also don't necessarily miss getting stuck in TSA and going through that hassle with it. But there's a nice blend between the two.
I think we would agree with that, right?
Yeah.
Yes. But yeah, we're ready to get back out there.
Yeah. For sure. Well, thank you very much. This was helpful, and it's great conversation, and hopefully this was helpful as well for you all.
Very much, and I'm sure there was a lot of